Stunning A-level results, but were they just a bit too good to be true? The Taliban surge continues as Afghan war veterans here reflect on what they lost and what it means.
There was obviously collateral damage. I'm sure some non-combatants, despite our best efforts, were killed or injured. So no, it wasn't worth it.
The Californian wildfire that is the biggest the state has ever seen. Headed home, the herd of elephants that appears to be almost at the end of a mammoth trek across China, and the Hollywood actor Reynolds on why he brought his film premiere to Wrexham.
It's genuinely the least I could do. I'm mortified that I haven't been able to get to Wrexham. So anytime I can kind of reach out to the community of Wrexham and do something, I'm happy to do it.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. The allegations may not be new, but they dramatically raise the stakes not only for Prince Andrew, but the royal family as a whole. For the first time, Virginia Giuffre has alleged in graphic terms in a court document that she was threatened into engaging in sex acts with Prince Andrew while she was a child, and when she claims the prince knew she was the victim of sex trafficking. She is suing him directly for damages in a civil case. The prince has long denied the claims, and his spokeswoman offered a simple no comment. Tonight, the prince is at Balmoral with the Queen.
It's a case stretching back 2 decades, involving 3 friends alleged to have abused Virginia Giuffre. One took his own life in custody. Another awaits a criminal trial. The third is the man in the photo, the Queen's second son. And today, the American justice system came calling for him too, with the 17-year-old at its centre, now a woman of 38, filing a complaint against him in New York. This is what she said 12 months ago.
He knows exactly what he's done, and I hope he comes clean about it.
Now she's filed detailed allegations that she was compelled to engage in sexual acts with Prince Andrew and feared death or physical injury, claiming he acted knowing that she was a sex trafficking victim, being forced to engage in sexual acts with him. Acts that, as a 38-year-old woman, continue to cause her significant emotional and psychological distress and harm. But there are also significant obstacles. Even without his royal status, Prince Andrew can't be extradited because it's a civil rather than criminal case.
The difficulty is going to be, first and foremost, she's going to have to serve a copy of the actual document itself on the Duke of York, and that's not going to be easy. So the case really doesn't even begin until service is effectuated. Once service is effectuated, there are many different legal hurdles that she's going to have to overcome.
Mr. Kubin represents a number of the late Jeffrey Epstein's victims, and this case will hinge on the Duke's friendship with him. Prince Andrew was captured on film staying at the billionaire's Manhattan home even after it emerged that Epstein was a convicted sex offender. Both were also close friends of Ghislaine Maxwell, who will stand trial in November on charges of conspiring with Epstein on the abuse of underage girls. Asked about it all in a television interview, Prince Andrew said he had no recollection of Virginia.
Didn't happen.
Do you remember her?
No. I have no recollection of ever meeting her. I can absolutely categorically tell you it never happened.
But her lawyer's adamant the Duke will have to face justice even if he evades being served papers.
If the court concludes that the defendant is trying to avoid service, the court can order any kind of service of process that will bring fair notice of the case to the defendant. And I think it's probably fair to say that Prince Andrew already has fair notice of this litigation.
Either way, the Duke has little chance of rehabilitating his role as a royal.
The Queen actually has a view that she doesn't micromanage her children, she doesn't like to interfere, and she does believe that if you wait long enough, things go away. But I don't think they are going to now.
Prince Andrew has consistently denied any wrongdoing, and both he and his lawyers are remaining tight-lipped tonight on a case likely to rest on one photo and the two very different accounts of those in it. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
And Rohit joins us now from the US. Rohit, how do you think this is likely to play out? Will it come to court?
It's possible, and it's possible that Prince Andrew appears, but there are absolutely no certainties, and on both sides many potential hurdles too. First of all, the papers need to be served, either personally to him or to a representative, but inside the UK. And then the Duke needs to decide whether to engage with this lawsuit. He could settle out of court. He could come to the US, but of course he would perhaps be questioned by the FBI in relation to the Epstein allegations. Or he could just ignore it and remain at home. But then the trial would go on nevertheless, and he may be found guilty and ordered to pay damages in absentia, a son of the Queen. Now, this is not a criminal case. These are civil charges. This hasn't been brought by a state, and what that means in part is that he won't be extradited to the US. However, the claimant will only have to prove her case on the balance of probability, not beyond reasonable doubt, as is the case in criminal matters. Nevertheless, a trial may well be months and perhaps even years away.
OK, right, for now, thank you very much indeed. Now, back here, after all the aggravation and recriminations over the grading of last year's A-levels, there was no mention of any algorithm this time. The calculation of the government seems to have been the class of 2021 had a really tough 2 years, so what's a little grade inflation to compensate and reward them? Hence, nearly 45% of results in England, Wales and Northern Ireland were A's and A stars. 2 years ago, it was 25%. The gap between private and state schools has widened, though, as did the one between London and the northeast of England.
Today is the day that hundreds of thousands of pupils in England, Wales and Northern Ireland will get their A-level results.
How are you feeling this morning, Bob?
I'm feeling a bit nervous. It's been a really weird 2 years.
For Charlotte and the class of COVID, this morning something else was about to spread.
Take care, Bob. You'll be fine.
The smiles were already infectious at her school as she became the latest to collect record results for A-levels and BTECs.
Have you done?
I got 4 A stars. I wasn't expecting that, to be honest with you. Yeah, I'm really, really happy.
Why did I do that?
As was almost everyone, with the grades teachers awarded at Balcarras Academy in Cheltenham.
So I got an A star, an A and a B.
Well
and
done.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. It's what I thought I'd get.
How have you guys done?
A lot better than I thought I was going to do.
Pretty much what I expected.
You don't think there was a temptation for teachers to be a bit generous?
It had to be an evidence-led process. We stuck religiously to the national guidelines, and we came up with a scheme of assessment, and these students were assessed.
In total, almost 45% of grades awarded by teachers in England, Wales and Northern Ireland were A or A star. That's up from 38.5% last year and less than 26% when full exams were last sat in 2019. This year, the gap also widened in England between the number of top grades at comprehensive versus private schools, from 24 percentage points in 2019 to more than 30% this summer.
We know that those from poorer backgrounds suffered the largest learning losses over the last 18 months or so. But it also appears that what school you attend has also shaped what grades you get this year as well.
Wherever students come from, the next concern is where they're going, with a record rush for university places.
We've seen a really big demand from students this year wanting a place at university. At Sheffield, we are doing everything we can to accommodate as many people as possible.
But at least this year's grades were delivered with compassion rather than by computers. The government decided to accept the inflation.
It has been an exceptional year. They've been dealing with exceptional challenges, and I think it's, just rewards for all their hard work, all their commitment.
From 2 years, unlike any other, today's students can at least take some comfort.
And Paul is here to talk about all this. Look, the inequalities were stark. The grade inflation was quite noticeable. What does the government do about that?
Well, look, the whole point of the system this year, Tom, obviously was to remove the lottery of exams. Most people felt that they wouldn't have been fair given the circumstances. But what has sort of happened here is the government's inadvertently reinforced the lottery of life here, the inequalities that we see anyway in the education system, whether that's state versus private school pupils or the disadvantage that black students face, the disadvantage that poorer students face. And really the criticism of the government is that maybe they didn't act soon enough in the school year. If they'd scrapped exams sooner, then maybe they could have introduced more measures to standardise grades a bit more fairly across the whole student population. But there's not much point now looking back at that. We've got to look forward to next year's challenge. How is the government going to deal with this huge balloon of grade inflation? They've just been consulting actually until recently on how to reinstate exams next year. Probably not back to normal, but what are they going to do here? Because potentially grades could fall next year if we go back to the old exam system. That wouldn't seem particularly fair. And I understand that really the longer term conversation going on in government now is how do we reset A-levels altogether? How do we get rid of this grade inflation? Maybe by scrapping the lettering of grades from A star to E, moving towards numbering of grades like they did with GCSEs. Would that be a way of restarting everything altogether? So perhaps the lasting legacy will be that we never return to the A-levels that we had pre-pandemic.
OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed. Our results in Scotland in Highers and Advanced Highers were also up on pre-pandemic levels, but down very slightly on last summer. The number of A to C grades, known as the attainment rate, fell in all the qualifications published today. Scotland's Education Secretary described the results as strong, achieved under extraordinary circumstances. There are more figures today to suggest that the race of the vaccine against the virus still isn't won. 3/4 of adults have now had both doses, but the daily total of deaths reached 146, which is actually the highest figure since the middle of March. The Taliban's seizure of yet more of Afghanistan is not persuading President Biden that he made the wrong call by pulling out American troops. He said this evening that Afghan leaders have to fight for themselves. An EU official has said the Taliban now holds 65% of the country. The areas in red here are thought to be under their control. And they claim to have captured 8 provincial capitals in the past week, including the key city of Kunduz, as well as Farah and Pul-e-Khumri, both of which the Taliban say fell today.
Soldiers of the Afghan army are fighting for their country's life, and they're losing. This fierce exchange of fire was recorded by an army unit in the northern city of Kunduz a few nights ago. People fleeing the insurgents' advance. And then later in the main square, the Taliban's flag flying. Afghanistan's president, Ashraf Ghani, is ringing around his district governors in the cities which haven't yet fallen. There are fewer of them with every day that passes. Taliban fighters, meanwhile, boast of their success. This is the eastern city of Farah. We've taken the governor's house and the police headquarters, say these men. Hundreds of thousands of Afghans are now refugees in their own country, fleeing the fighting or the brutality of Taliban rule.
People are living in fear and dread. Women are already being, killed and shot for breaching rules that have been imposed on what they can wear and on where they can move without a male escort. It's time for the international community to prioritize peace in Afghanistan.
The Afghan army was supposed to secure the peace, but it is failing its biggest test, and its most important ally shows no sign of reversing its decision to leave the battlefield.
They've got to fight for themselves, fight for their nation. The United States I'll insist we continue to keep the commitments we made of providing close air support, making sure that their Air Force functions and is operable, resupplying their forces with food and equipment, and paying all their salaries. But they've got to want to fight.
No one's coming to this country's rescue, so as long as its army fails, hope here for a future that is safe looks frailer still. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
Well, now that so much of the territory once held by British troops is under Taliban control, the question of whether it was worth more than 450 British lives is one that haunts their families and also their commanders at the time. The head of C Company 3 Para, which served in Helmand Province, believes it was not. Major Paul Blair told us he was still dealing with the loss of one of his soldiers. He was responsible for the 127 men in this photograph, around which we are basing our series, Afghanistan, photo from the front line.
What's that, sir? Chewing anyone? Sangin, Helmand Province. In one of the most dangerous outposts the British Army has ever set up base, he was the man in charge on a mission that ironically began with optimism and good intentions.
I think a lot of us had a fairly typical romantic view of operations, that we certainly felt that we had the moral high ground. We were going to do good.
Initially, Major Paul Blair thought the local population would buy into that vision.
For the first couple of months, it was very much deploying into and around the Goresh area, meeting with the elders. We delivered lots of school books to the local school and enabling all of those other security elements to go in and improve the lives of the average Afghan.
Go, mate. It didn't last. Paul Blair's C Company 3 Para became targets. Attacks on their new base at Sangin so regular. In 2006, he told ITV News, it was part of daily life.
It is stressful, yes. The apprehension before an attack is quite significant, but we find that once an attack starts, most of the soldiers resort to doing their job and focus solely on that.
One mortar round was landed just in the front of the mission had changed. Winning hearts and minds no longer realistic. Survival became the aim. And when one attack on the base claimed the life of Lance Corporal Luke McCulloch, Paul Blair would experience the loneliness of command.
Unusually, the Taliban had landed a mortar inside our compound, and I just heard it flying over the top of us and landing, and as soon as I heard the cries of medic, I knew that something had happened.
Luke McCulloch was a popular soldier on attachment to the Paras from the Royal Irish Regiment. His loss caused his commanding officer to ask himself the most difficult questions.
Did I not correctly interpret the threat? Did I not take enough action? And yeah, I had to deal with that and spent many years trying to deal with that.
Have you dealt with it yet?
Not entirely. I don't think I ever will.
Despite their base being under a state of semi-permanent siege, Major Paul Blair's C Company suffered no further fatalities. Only as they left Sangin at the end of their tour could he allow the pressure to show.
I remember leaving Sangin on one of the helicopters flying out, and I blubbed for 5 minutes, looking out the window with the Chinook gunner, trying to look reasonably sympathetic, but at the same time trying to look cool and man his gun. But I had a little blub to myself, and I was okay. But interestingly, I had a look around the helicopter, and there were a number of soldiers who were having a similar emotional response to just that release of pressure, having been under it for such a long period of time.
They'd arrived in good spirits, looking forward to a mission they believed in. The mood captured in this company photograph. The verdict looking back is very different.
Was it worth the price that we've paid?
No. Looking at the situation now, Helmand in Taliban control. The extent that we smashed up the countryside, blew up bridges, killed no end of insurgents. There was obviously collateral damage. I'm sure some non-combatants, despite our best efforts, were killed or injured. So no, it wasn't worth it.
Well, Paul Davis reporting there, and very sobering it was. And you can see more from our series of reports on our dedicated website, itv.com/photo from the front line. Now, the body of British hiker Esther Dingley, who went missing in the Pyrenees last November, has been found, very sadly, by her partner. Miss Dingley had been walking by herself near the Spanish and French border. Her body and her equipment were found together close to where a bone was discovered 2 weeks ago. OK, in a worldwide spate of wildfires, the one raging across California is now the biggest the American state has ever suffered. It has been burning for 4 weeks through grass, through brush and forests rendered bone dry by the heat and the wind. Temperatures could rise still higher in California in the next couple of days. 600 homes have already been destroyed, with more in the fire's path.
California has rarely witnessed wildfires on a scale like this. For nearly a month, they've burned their way through an area the size of London. The state's worst fire season in its history has destroyed hundreds of homes, and there's no end in sight.
Left behind a lot of stuff. Fires ravaged through everything.
It's pretty emotional just thinking of all your neighbors and your friends, you know, that are frantic trying to move all their animals and everything.
As fire crews battle away, only a fifth of the blaze has been contained. And this is the wasteland left in its wake. The historic gold rush town of Greenville, nearly all but destroyed. California's governor says the state is facing an unprecedented situation.
The dries are getting a lot drier, and the heat and hot weather is a lot hotter than it's ever been. The extreme weather conditions, just likes of which we've never seen in our history.
More than 5,000 crew are tackling what's become known as the Dixie Fire, which has now spread through 4 counties. Heat waves and drought have combined to create the deadly conditions. With temperatures hitting nearly 40 degrees Celsius and forecast to stay high, there's little hope on the horizon. Neil Connery, News at 10.
Well, still in America, the mayor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, has resigned after an inquiry found he'd sexually harassed 11 women, including state employees. He is still denying the claims, but said the best thing he could do was step down, which he'll do in a fortnight's time. Since he made his announcement, more women have come forward this evening to say they were sexually harassed by Mayor Cuomo. It has been a mammoth trek, but a group of elephants that had wandered miles from home in China are now almost back where they started. The herd packed their trunks, yes they did, last March and headed north from a nature reserve in the southwest of Yunnan province. By November, they had arrived in Pu'er, where one of 2 calves was born. They stayed there several months. They eventually made it to the outskirts of Kunming, 300 miles from home, having trashed crops and caused hundreds of thousands of pounds of damage along the way. They finally headed for home, and guided in the right direction by an army of workers, their odyssey is now nearly at an end after 17 months.
When the elephants turned this corner to cross the Wanjiang River, the teams who have been tracking their every move breathed a sigh of relief. The herd is now back in its natural habitat and just over 100 miles from home. Nobody knows for sure what prompted them to head north to the capital Kunming, but their 600-mile round trip has captivated millions. Even more so since the arrival of calves along the way. For a world desperately in need of some escapism, there's been the joy of mud baths to watch. The young ones being typically restless at nap time, and mum giving a nudge up when their climbing skills were not quite up to the task.
2个象宝宝非常可爱，他们呢非常贪玩，
仗着象群的保护，在沙土中呢，经常呢嬉戏打闹，连滚带爬，还用鼻子呢把这个泥土涂到身上，变成小红象。
It has been the playful moments like sliding through cornfields and finding an open well out of which to drink that has enchanted a global audience. Dozens were dispatched with food to try and keep them away from villages and ultimately steer them home. But there is sometimes not much you can do to deter a determined elephant, and in the course of their journey they have caused an estimated £500,000 worth of damage. They quickly discovered farms are good snack stops.
预期，对于被象群吃掉的庄稼，村民表示，我们庄稼吃掉了，明年可以长。大象如果损坏了，就没有了。
Asian elephants have first-class state protection in China. Protecting this wandering herd has been a huge logistical challenge for the authorities. Their homecoming brings to an end a very epic, but thankfully rare, roaming adventure. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Beijing.
The best story for a long while, it must be said. Now some sport, and he said his tearful adios to the club that made him, and he then Barcelona on Sunday. Tonight, Lionel Messi, as expected, said salut to Paris Saint-Germain. He flew into Paris during the day and managed a wave from an airport building to fans waiting outside. This evening, he signed a 2-year contract with an option for a third. The now traditional signing-on photo was released by the club tonight. Messi will be paid £500,000 a week. No wonder he is smiling. He said he was impatient and excited to be starting a new chapter of his career in Paris. Finally, the Hollywood actor and producer Ryan Reynolds has already endeared himself to Wrexham in North Wales and quite a few others besides by buying the local football club 8 months ago. I mean, random, you might say, but true. He hasn't been able to visit since, so by way of keeping in touch, he arranged a special premiere of his latest film, Free Guy, in the town's Odeon tonight. He told us he wants the world to see the film on the big screen, but particularly the people of Wrexham.
It's a feel-good film about a character called Guy who realises he's living in a video game.
Mondays, am I right, Joe?
But it's Ryan Reynolds' connection to the beautiful game that interests the people of Wrexham, particularly when he arranges for them to see the film before the rest of us.
I think it's genuinely the least I could do. I'm mortified that I haven't been able to get to Wrexham because of obvious restrictions with travel right now and all throughout the last year. But so anytime I can kind of reach out to the community of Wrexham and do something, I'm happy to do it. Our work in Wrexham has as much to do with the football club as it does the community that surrounds it. So it's been really exciting and it's been a lot of fun.
And so tonight, specially invited charity and emergency frontline workers in the North Wales town were treated by the new co-owner of their football club.
We do feel really, really honoured at this time to be here tonight.
It's really exciting, really, to think that a Hollywood star would want to have a premiere in Wrexham town centre. It's amazing, really, isn't it?
Reynolds and co-owner Rob McElhenney are also making a documentary series about the club. Their arrival seeing unprecedented demand for season tickets and merchandise.
The shirts are certainly a lot of the merchandise, like the shirts, have all been sold out. We're trying to make as many as we can to get them in the hands of people who want them. But I guess that's sort of a uptown problem.
A box office smash is no doubt guaranteed, in Wrexham at least. Nina Nanar, News at 10.
What a totally bizarre, brilliant story that is. Good night, see you tomorrow.